My name is Brittany. I'm working with Kisma, Hope, and Mirage, and we're going to be discussing Asperger's syndrome. Asperger's syndrome is a autism spectrum disorder, so we're talking about a neurological development disorder of the brain. There's a lot of things that are happening in the brain with Asperger's that we're not 100% about, still doing a lot of research, but there are some key components that we're learning that are different in somebody with Asperger's than somebody who has normal, healthy brain development. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about normal, healthy brain development, what we expect, and then what we see a little bit differently in Asperger's. And then Mirage will be covering even more about the pathophysiology of the disorder. So I'm going to start by talking about gray matter and white matter. This is brain tissue. The gray matter houses cell bodies and cell axons, so it kind of communicates to the rest of the brain once it receives some sensory information. And white matter actually receives sensory information and passes it up to the gray matter, again, for processing, getting the correct stimulus information to the correct part of the brain. So somebody that has Asperger's actually doesn't develop this as well as somebody that has a normal, healthy brain. So this is a picture that we have here. We're looking at an MRI. A group of researchers were studying gray matter developments in females and males, and then also Asperger's syndrome. So this is a normal, healthy brain, and what they've done is just highlighted in blue the parts of the brain that don't have very good development of gray matter. This is the right side of the brain, so that makes the back part of it where the occipital lobe is, and then the front part where the frontal lobe is. And so there's three primary sections that they found a deficit of gray matter, and that is going to be in the basal ganglia extending to the thalamus and the ventral striatum within the frontal medial lobe, or medial frontal lobe, and the cerebellum. So what we're talking about too with the cerebellum is the part of the brain that receives sensory information and regulates motor movement. We're talking about posture, balance, coordination, speech. Speech in particular is something that is very affected in somebody that has Asperger's syndrome. Communication is not as strong, as well as some social skills. So we're kind of seeing that maybe the sensory portions of the brain that receive information and those neurons that receive that information may not be as well developed in somebody that has Asperger's. So I'm going to show you also a picture of the white matter as well. White matter in somebody with Asperger's, the development is interesting because there's both a deficit and also excess white matter as well. So in this picture, again, the blue is the deficit and the red is going to be the excess. So you can see the white matter deficit is actually kind of concentrated on the left hemisphere, and that's going to be primarily in the frontotemporal lobe and then occipital lobe. It's going to be primarily, and also a little bit in the cerebellum as well. So we're talking about same type of regions that are being affected. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the limbic system. Somebody that has Asperger's is going to have a little bit of a different functioning limbic system as well. It's basically the core part of the brain that's dealing with like emotional responses. So we do see a little bit of a difficult time with somebody with Asperger's processing emotional information, displaying proper emotional responses, and then also like reading people, which sounds interesting to say, but that kind of leads into the next part that I'm going to talk about, which is the mirror neuron system. So the mirror neuron system is going to be the part where, like, if you're observing somebody else doing a behavior, and this is especially true of like children, they start to mimic some of that behavior. That is actually underdeveloped too in somebody with Asperger's. So it's kind of interesting information. As far as the next portion I'm going to talk about, we're also talking about the sensor motory gating, which is important to talk about because somebody that has Asperger's a lot of times has a hard time with tics or like OCD type behaviors. They'll do things repetitively. They'll say things repetitively. There's a part of your brain that actually filters out excess stimulus so that it can focus in on one particular part of a stimulus. It's super helpful for focus or for good brain processing. And somebody that has Asperger's actually has a really hard time with sensory gating. So that's why they think a lot of times Asperger's syndrome individuals have tics or things that they, like routines that they feel like they have to do over and over again. So hopefully that's helpful to you to understand a little bit about what we're talking about. And Mirage and the rest of the girls will be taking it off from you. Thank you so much.